Yan, mga kameta, kamusta kayo dyan? Sabi ko mag-catch up tayo konti. Ayan, may konting break tayo. Pag-usapan natin, ituloy natin yung mga discussion natin kahapon mga kameta. I hope my internet is okay. Wala akong walang load yung isang mas matino kong phone at tayo pa ay medyo para na gumamit ng mga wifi kung saan-saan kung hindi tayo ito completely sure dun sa seguridad niya. So I'm just using itong mas lumang phone natin. I hope the visuals and the audio is not too bad and the connection is not too bad. Anyway, mga kameta, gusto lang natin ituloy yung mga discussion natin kahapon. Because interestingly, kagabi, no, habang nagva-Valentine's Day, hopefully you folks had a good Valentine's. Habang nagva-Valentine's Day yung iba and habang daming hanash at haliparot yung iba, tayo po ituloy-tuloy yung mga discussions online, no. So, yung isang interesting discussion na nangyari kahapon mga kameta is walang sound? May sound ba? Baka fake news ka, Micah. May sound ba po tayo? There should be a sound. Anyway, ituloy natin discussion natin kahapon. Ay nako, Mike, baka fake news ka. O, ikaw lang nagsabi no sound. Tingnan natin yung ibang walang sound. Ayun talaga. Ayan mga kameta. Sige, lakasan natin. Hindi, ito kahapon mga kameta. Kagabi, habang bago tayo matulog, meron tayong biglang kadebate dyan sa Twitter. Alam mo naman tayo, very provocative tayo mag-tweet, but that's precisely the point, to provoke discussions and all. Obviously, that also exposes you to a lot of criticisms and backlash, etc. Both sides. So, inaatake tayo ng mga katatay, inaatake din tayo ng mga hardcore dilawan siguro. But hindi ko na pinapansin yung may iba. Medyo naman tayo. Medyo focus naman tayo. Eye on the ball. Anyway, sorry, I'm just seeing all of these messages coming in from editors and all. Balikan ko kayo mamaya. Ito mga kameta. So one interesting discussion we had was with one Teddy that apparently didn't block me kasi si Teddy Locsin ay wala talagang na-block na talaga tayo ng na-block na tayo ng Teddy Locsin na yan. Chine-check ko, hindi, wala pa rin eh. Talaga na-block tayo. Hindi ko alam ba tayo na-block. I never directly engaged that guy. Once actually tried to troll me online. I mean, we met each other when we were working ABS-CBN together. But, he's just polite in person and I'm super gentleman in person, so walang issue. But online, there was once na parang umepal lang siya. The media quoted me on something I said on West Philippines in South China Sea. Among many things that I got completely right about where Duterte was going wrong. And then parang comment niya medyo yabang. Parang, sino yan? Parang ganun lang. Parang, I know, alam ko kilala niya ako because we were together in 2016. Tapos 2017 and 18, sasabihin niya sino yan, diba? 2016, we were together actually in the same panel radio. And he was over-talking and trying to dominate the conversation and all. And ako naman, in the spirit of being nice and all, hindi ko, parang sige, pagbigyan ko na lang ito. Anyway, let him have his moment. But obviously, I'm a person that I'm a person who let things slide once, but Anyway, hindi naman ito. But this is not Teddy Locsin. Forget about that guy. Hindi ko alam what's happening with him. Ang ambassador na ba sa UK yan? Anyway, hopefully one day he'll come up with really the time and focus and, attention and energy and intelligence to really finish a proper book and really serious intellectual work, no? And then probably we can have a discussion about his merits. Now, going back to this, mamaya na ako bardagulan. Going back to this, so yung isang Teddy na naipagdebate sa atin ay si Teddy Casino, of course, who's of course a progressive person, with an intellectual bent and all. And so we had a back and forth kagabi on Twitter, and that was interesting. Apparently, Teddy Locsin did not block Teddy Casino kasi I saw Teddy Casino quoting from Teddy Locsin. Anyways, baka solidarity yan ng mga Teddy. Anyway, balikan natin yan. Mamaya na yung mga quantum verse na Ant-Man, ha? Papanoorin natin yan. Baka matuba tayo kay Magellan. Yeah, let's go back to this. Okay, magulo. No, going back to this. We had some back and forth discussion about this issue of EDCA and BBM, etc. Now, ganito kasi, mga kameta. One of the weird things that we notice right now is that there's almost like a convergence of view between mga ka-SMNI, katatay, at mga, alam mo naman, I love China type of people on one hand, and then yung mga so-called progressives or self-described progressives and patriots, etc., on this issue of EDCA and all. So what's very interesting mga kameta is that both of them are essentially attacking BBM by saying BBM is dragging us into a war or a conflict like that. Or at the very least, BBM is undermining supposedly our territorial integrity or sovereignty by granting Americans more basing and military access. Now, ibang usapan pa yung potential basing access between Japan and the Philippines. That's also going to create a lot of complications of its own, and that's something that I'm writing on. A number of stuff I'm working on about the potential visiting forces agreement between Philippines and Japanese self-defense forces. No. Now, going back to this, in fairness naman, I mean, may mga iba dyan na parang it's not worth responding to, and you know that they're just completely doctrinaire about it, or just worse, alam niya na connect the dots. But in fairness, this discussion with Eddie Casino, I really appreciate it because I think it's a kind of a debate and discussion we need to have. So, let me just be absolutely clear. First of all, I'm not comfortable with our country being dependent on any other power when it comes to our national defense, right? Let's be absolutely clear about that. And at the same time, wag rin tayong bulag-bulagan. Many really wrong things happen when we had massive foreign military troop presence in the Philippines. I'm not talking about Second World War and all, which were total invasion and all. I'm also talking about, for instance, yung mga nangyari, mga human rights violations, crimes, sexual abuse, among others, against sa ating mga kababayan by visiting foreign troops. You can connect the dots. So we have had many cases of alleged or proven rape and murder of Filipino citizens by visiting forces. So we have very, very bad cases, warring cases there. So I'm also not comfortable with having huge military bases in certain area because it can create a lot of problem. So if you go in Japan, for instance, in Okinawa, maraming protests with regards to that, against the presence of U.S. bases. In the Philippines also, we had to deal with a lot of these unfortunate incidents and tragedies, Now, tanongin nila si Tatay Digong bakit pinalaya yung isang American soldier na na convict doon sa, alam mo naman kay Jennifer Laude case, diba? Or tanongin niyo si Harry Roque, diba, to explain that. Or Mr. Human Rights, Mr. Anti-VFA, etc., to explain that situation. Now, going back to this, mga kameta. So let me also be very clear about it. Number 3, so 2 things. First of all, I'm not comfortable with dependence on foreign powers. Second, we have to acknowledge that there were things that really went wrong when we had foreign troop presence in the Philippines. And third, we also have to acknowledge that talagang may kakulangan yung alyansa natin with America in the past in terms of helping us to protect our interests, So for instance, yung nangyaring Scarborough Shoal crisis, hindi talaga tayo tinulungan ng America noon. This is panahon ni Obama, So we have to acknowledge these multiple layers, Now, having said that, mga kameta, so what is the way forward? The way forward is ultimately for the Philippines to develop its own defensive capabilities, right? To have what we call minimum deterrence capability, diba? In-explain natin yan, mga kameta. It's like becoming like a porcupine, right? Na parang may tetano yung mga spikes mo para hindi ka bubuli ng mas malalaking mga predators, So that's definitely the goal. But this is the unfortunate reality, and there's a little bit of a chicken-egg element to it. But the unfortunate reality is that because we have had a long history of strategic dependence on the U.S. and long history of corruption within our state institutions, including the military institutions and all, hindi natin na-develop talaga yung ating sandatang lakas. So the reality is that we're operating from a very low base. Thanks to President Aquino, we started to modernize our AFP back in 2012, allocated, I think, at $1.6 to $2 billion for initial acquisitions that got us F-15 fighters, but those are not real fighters. They're upgraded trainer fighters from Korea. So we still don't have real fighters. Not even the more upgraded versions of F-15, F-16, which by the way are increasingly obsolete. Now, I don't know kung nanood kayo Top Gun and all, I think they use an F-18 fighter for that, right? But these fighters are going to be increasingly no match for 4.5 generation and 5th generation stealth fighters, including mga F-22 na ginamit to shut down the Chinese balloons and I don't know whatever UFO they were shooting down over the skies of Canada and the US. Now, that's one thing that is important to keep in mind. But at least we got back to supersonic stage, and at the same time, piniprepare natin yung ating Air Force to operate more sophisticated weapon systems, no aircrafts and all. We also got a number of frigates, including refurbished ones, but also more newer versions, including with Samsung and some counterparts in Korea. We're also getting some missile systems, including the supersonic BrahMos missile system, which is an Indian-Russian technology, and we're hoping to move towards hypersonic missile systems. So, unti-unti mga kameta, since 2012, the Philippines has been moving towards developing minimum deterrence capability. So we're now supposed to be in phase 3 because that was a 15-year modernization program. We're papunta na tayo sa phase 3. Nagsimula yan in 2012, it's 2023, so it's more than 10 years now. So we're supposed to move to phase 3, but the reality is that dun sa phase 2 nagkaroon tayo ng problema with funding, with pandemic, with some acquisition issues. So yung Horizon 2 or phase 2 of revised AFP Modernization Act implementation has been quite delayed. But we're looking at acquisition of advanced fighter jets, real fighter jets, and potentially even submarines and more sophisticated missile defense systems in the coming years. Or at least yun ang dapat gawin natin. So that's gonna take time, mga kameta. And while we're catching up with our own objectives in terms of AFP modernization, China is moving ahead leaps and bounds, no? In terms of both their asymmetrical and conventional military capabilities. So, behind schedule tayo, but I think we have to continue doing that. Now, so on one hand, we have to develop our own capabilities, but it's gonna take time. And since we operated from a very low base, super nasa catch-up mode tayo, mga kameta. That means in the meantime, we are vulnerable to predation, and that's exactly what we have seen over the past 3 decades, beginning with the fact that once the US bases left the Philippines in 1992, within 2 years or so, the Chinese took over Mischief Reef. Now, it is true that the Philippine-US alliance did not prevent the loss of Scarborough Shoal, but what critics also forget is that the United States changed its policy position by 2018 and 19, so much so that it became very clear. I'll post to you guys yung articles and all, the policy position change, or rather clarification of the policy position, or rather a shift in the posture towards implementation of the key provisions of the MDT. Anyway, this is where I think President Duterte did some good things, or at least, or to be more particular, I think Secretary Lorenzana, our former Defense Secretary, did some good things by pressuring Americans to be much more committed to us in terms of our alliance. So, noong 2019, guys, na-clarify na ng Amerika for the first time in public and at the cabinet level, we're talking about the former Secretary of State of the US, na-clarify sila na sa ilalim ng Mutual Defense Treaty ng Pilipinas, if our troops, our aircrafts, and our vessels come under attack, automatically the Mutual Defense Treaty with the Philippines will apply. That kind of clarification was not present from Carter administration, from Nixon administration to Carter administration to the two Bush administrations, Clinton administration, all the way to Obama. Ambiguous po ang Amerika. They adopted the policy of so-called strategic ambiguity, but for me, honestly, that was not strategic ambiguity. That was just ambiguity for the sake of not getting entangled by the Philippines' claims in the area. Or, in short, parang open relationship type yung gusto ng America with us in that time. So what we did was we pressured the Americans, and we partly have to thank the previous administration, including Secretary Lorenzana especially, for pressuring the Americans to be more helpful to us. Now, it's not also what we did, it's also that America itself realized they cannot be non-committal on a lot of important issues, including the future of the Philippines, because that also had implications for perceptions of U.S. as a reliable ally, including from countries like Taiwan, which are not even a treaty ally of U.S., but are expecting U.S. to somehow be a robust partner in preventing an invasion of the self-ruling democratic island. No? And of course, other allies like Japan, Australia, like treaty allies like Japan, Australia, and others, we're also wondering what's going on with the United States. No? So we see that in 2018-19, the U.S. becomes much more confrontational towards China, in ways Obama never was, in ways Nixon was never was, in ways Clinton was never was, because Clinton, Nixon, Obama, all of them, especially from Nixon to Clinton, the U.S. wanted to engage China as a kind of international partner partner, as a supposed responsible stakeholder. And nung panahon ni Bush, he was so bogged down in the Middle East, he was in no position to really confront China, deal with China in any serious way. Kaya nga nagsulat ng libro si Farid Zakari ng Post-American World, because while US was so bogged down in the Middle East with those ridiculous, dumb wars, China was just moving up the ladder, you know? Kaya nga rise of the rest, diba? Anyway, so things actually changed. And just as I predicted, also correctly, the Biden administration will adopt the Trump administration's China policy, but with better tactics, much more refined approach. So if you look at the Biden administration, it's just as aggressive towards China, and we see that in terms of how do you measure that? What are the indicators? More and expanded freedom of navigation operations sa West Philippine Sea. Pinapadala ng Amerika yung mga malalaking warships, mga barko, minsan dalawa-dalawa pa, para i-challenge yung China's claims over fake islands. No? More than that, the United States has also imposed very stringent sanctions on high-tech sector of China. Right? Nangyari yan under Biden, by the way. Right? Trump kind of got it started, but it's really Biden who's going all the way on this. And then we saw also the Biden administration, early on, Blinken, Secretary of State Blinken, called his counterpart, speaking of Teddy Locsin, nung time na yan, at he also reiterated that the U.S. will come to the Philippines rescue should a third party, you know who, attack our vessels, aircrafts, or personnel in the West Philippine Sea. Very particular, West Philippine Sea. No other previous American administration was so specific, so public, and at such a high level in terms of clarifying the parameters of the Mutual Defense Treaty. This should be absolutely clear, mga kameta, right? So this is the problem I have with a lot of critics. Either they're misinformed, either they're not researching properly, either they're being too ideological about this, or worse, right? So, on one hand, since 2012, the Philippines is slowly building on its own capabilities, partly due to the tragedy that happened in Scarborough Shoal. At the same time, since 2018 and 2019, we see the Americans are becoming much confrontational towards China and much more directly helpful to the Philippines and much more reassuring. So these two things are coming together. And this is where the EDCA comes in. Because mga kameta, the reason EDCA was being negotiated by the Aquino administration, right? Remember, this was being negotiated after the Scarborough Shoal because we recognized that we needed a derivative, a corollary, a supplementary defense deal to make sure na mas helpful ang mga Amerikano sa Pilipinas in dealing with the West Philippine Sea issue. And in particular, the EDCA, mga kameta, in fact, if you look at the initial negotiations vis-a-vis EDCA, the Philippines was pushing America to even lease to us some of their submarines, frigates, and weapon systems. And US kind of said no. But in the end, a kind of compromise came out. I have my issues with how it was negotiated. I have some of my own reservations with EDCA and the circumstances of it. Medyo from position of desperation natin i-negotiate yan. I have some serious issues about that. But in the end, the point was EDCA will be a specific kind of a derivative of the Mutual Defense Treaty between the Philippines and the United States that will directly deal with the West Philippine Sea issue by granting Pentagon forward deployment presence to bases close to the West Philippine Sea. So you're talking about Bautista Air Base sa Palawan, malapit sa Calayan Group of Islands, Basta Air Base sa Pampanga, malapit sa Scarborough Shoal, and by expanding America's forward deployment presence to rotational access, which is not unconstitutional, kaya nga na-aproba ng ating Supreme Court, you know, yung EDCA, so there's no legal constitutional issues anymore with it. So through expanded American presence and allowing Americans to preposition weapon systems to be able to respond right away to a crisis, that way we can deter further Chinese expansion within Philippine claimed waters or yung tinatawag natin na West Philippine Sea. No? Eh, ang problema, si Pangulong Digong, because gusto niya makipag-friendship, beshi sa China, hindi niya fully implement yung EDCA. So, dinidribble niya, hapyaw-hapyaw. So, EDCA was not really fully implemented during the Duterte administration. That's why the term that the U.S. used earlier this month was finally now there'll be a full implementation of EDCA. But not only full implementation of EDCA, but expansion of the parameters of EDCA, including the bases that will be provided to the Americans. Now, so if you look at it, mga kameta, I'm just explaining to you why EDCA was important to the Philippines back then, or we thought it's important. And you can clearly see also my cost of EDCA not being implemented under Duterte because it weakened our positions dyan sa West Philippine Sea. And you look at it. past 6 years clearly showed us that the Tatay way of doing things, which is let's be nice to those who bully us, and then let's expect concessions and mercy from them. To quote the president, be I don't know, be nice to them, they'll be merciful. It didn't work because nangyaring Reed Bank, nangyaring Whitson Reef, lumala yung situation. Last year we filed close to 200 note verbals. So all of this shows that the bullying ay continuous dyan sa West Philippine Sea. And at the same time, sabi ko na naman, predict naman natin yan, hindi mangyari yung death trap, mali yung mga opposition, mali din yung government, because wala talaga investments na dumating. Zero real big ticket infrastructure investment. There were investments in Capital Hill, sure, including yung Pogo, right? Baka maana na naman tayo dyan. But no real big ticket infrastructure projects. All the 24 billion blah blah blah, really not much came in, no? So what I'm saying here, mga kameta, is what Marcos Jr. is trying to do is this. Diba sabi nga ni Einstein, hindi ko sinasabi si Magellan Jr. Einstein. Sabi ni Einstein, parang ang definition ng diba, mucho loco of insanity is if you keep on doing the same thing, expecting different results. So obviously, the Tatay way of doing things was not working, so you have to try different thing. So that's why Marcos moved ahead with implementation of EDCA. Now, where things get a little bit tricky for me, and this is where I appreciate correction of Tatay Digong's mistakes, because he was a neophyte really in foreign policy, geopolitics, pang barangay chairman lang yung geopolitics niya. War agad, diba? Wala kasi siyang maipakitang gains dun sa kanyang pro-China policy, kaya dinadaan na lang sa warmongering, fear-mongering. So, war agad, diba? Parang as if naman China just, ganyan lang China. As if even Russia is not as bad. Although, of course, eventually they invaded Ukraine, but there were so many phases before they went for full-scale war. Remember, the harassment of Ukraine started in 2014 pa, diba? With Crimea situation. So it took them a long time from Crimea to a full-scale invasion. China is not even at the Crimea level with us, all right? So let's be very clear about it. And China is not Russia. Their risk appetite is different. Their status quo power, their rising power. They have no reason to be as aggressive as Russia. Anyway, going back to this, I'm just saying, huwag ka nang makinig dun sa mga pang-barangay level ng geopolitics. Let's talk about real geopolitics. Let's talk about sophisticated statecraft, no? Which China has to a great degree. Now, where I am not 100% sure is anong exactly yung mga bases na inopen sa US dun sa 4 additional ones. Kasama ba dyan yung sa Mavulis and Fuga, or if ever those bases will be open up to US in an event of contingency in Taiwan. So in principle, I see, and I've argued this, that if you strengthen Philippine-US alliance, you may actually deter and prevent conflict, because you raise the cost of invasion of Taiwan. So you create more chances for peace by being strong than the other way around. So the argument that automatically by more US presence there'll be war, it's kind of amateurish pang barangay, because it forgets the value of deterrence and preparation. And as President Marcos kind of correctly said, if war is about to happen, might as well be prepared for it. And because madadamay talagang Pilipinas, and as a US treaty ally, we're going to always be kind of a target anyway. So better prepare for it and prevent it by show of strength, right? Than just waiting for Armageddon, right? So that's kind of the logic here. Nonetheless, since we still don't have full details, and I don't know what reassurances the Americans have given to Marcos Jr., I am not 100% sold on the expanded EDCA implementation. Right? So, hindi naman tayo yung, dahil lang hindi siya tatay style, correcting siya. No. So, that's why I'm saying, my stance is very nuanced. I can see the argument for full implementation of EDCA because, after all, we're responding to bullying and the threats of invasion of Taiwan. Not the other way around. Let's be very clear about this. But I'm not very sure whether, because I don't know what assurances we got and how credible these assurances are, I'm not 100% sure if this is the best decision per se, but it could potentially be the best decision under under relatively bad circumstances, geopolitical circumstances. So let's see. That's why I am not making a final judgment on this yet, especially from a normative position. So ang ginagawa po natin dito, in-explain lang natin yung circumstances that have led to these kinds of decisions. and what could be the potential implications of that, and what factors could contribute to the whole permutation of potential outcomes out there. All right. Now, nonetheless, let me be very clear, mga kameta. What I found highly problematic with critics, whether from the supposed left or from the Tatay side and all of that, is this. First of all, it's so naive to say it's a situation of war where kaagad we're risking. No. Right? The invasion plans for Taiwan have been there for a long time, so you rather prepare for it or deter it. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The second thing to keep in mind also is that let's not forget that the threat to us in the West Philippine Sea is not from the West. I personally am critical of the invasion of Iraq and many other countries in the Middle East and all of that, and a lot of mess that Western military interventions created in much of the world, especially the Middle East. I see the argument and criticism of that. President Obama, many top American politicians have already acknowledged that. So given the end. But here in the Philippines, in the case of West Philippine Sea, it's not the West which is the threat to us. So let's be very clear about that. So what I'm also against is drawing false equivalence, saying, etong dalawang superpowers are exactly the same, let's just not get damay. No. One is a treaty ally which is not threatening us. Yes, it was a problem for us 100 years ago, 50 years ago maybe, 30 years ago maybe. But the other one is threatening you in the West Philippine Sea. So I'm also against the argument of false equivalence, right? So, in short, yan ang take ko sa whole EDCA expansion issue. It is multi-layered, it is contingent with caveats and all. But overall, what I can say is that the Tatay way of doing things was simply not working. If anything, it was parang enabler na siya dun sa nangyari sa West Philippine Sea, etc. So a correction was necessary. What I cannot fully attest to is whether Marcos Jr. is overcorrecting the situation. Now, let's also wait for more updates because mga kameta, the Philippines is also exploring expanded defense deals with Japan. So baka pag pumasok ang Japan at US, lalong mas malakas yung United Front, lalong ma-deter ang China. That's probably at least the logic behind it. And then potentially with Australia and other countries too. So more and more are yet to come. That's why I rather hold back judgment. Nevertheless, I'll always say, I'd rather have us rely on our own capabilities. I don't want foreign troops on our soil as much as possible. But the reality is that we still do not have minimum deterrence capability. It's going to take some time. And if we're just going to wait until we get that capability, baka wala na, huling lang lahat. And then the other thing is this. We have to make sure this EDCA will go hand in hand with getting the best possible weapon systems, etc. from our allies to build up our own defensive capabilities. So there has to be a conscious effort by the Philippines to pressure America and other allies to give us the best weapon system so that we can be more self-reliant at hindi lang tayo umasa sa iba. Because at the end of the day, we should be here for ourselves. And at the end of the day, if we're giving basic access, we have to get something in return. And if we're giving basic access, we have to make sure that this doesn't lead to human rights violations, sexual abuses, and all of those horrible things that usually come with major troop deployments abroad, no? Including in our own historical context, no? Alright, mga kameta, I'll keep it there. I'm just saying these are the kind of discussions we need. Measured, calibrated, not too emotional, objective, and historically contextualized with proper research and update. And unfortunately, that's what I don't see a lot. A lot of people are throwing out opinion there without doing their study, without doing their research, without having access, without knowing what's been happening behind the scenes. Now, hindi naman tayo nagyabang. I've written at least 2 full-blown books which directly deal with the maritime issues in this part of the world, maritime disputes in this part of the world. Not to mention covering and writing on the South China dispute, among others, since at least 2011, 2012, right? So this is based on my experience, not as only an academic and a journalist, but also someone who has been dealing directly with policymakers, relevant policymakers from different sides. Nakausap na natin lahat, including mga Chinese officials, etc. throughout the year. So yun ang masasabi ko for now. Alright, mga kameta, let's have more discussion of this soon. Yan. Thank you kay Ma'am Eden Olonan as always, Fanny San Miguel, kay Mel Rowell, Cabangon, kay Jocelyn Lumberio, yan, Eunice Babalcon. Thank you very much to all of you for your support. I'm just saying, Now, obviously, pwedeng sa, ikaw Richard, balahura ka naman on Twitter, etc. Yeah, but you see, I follow what Socrates said. Socrates said you have to seduce people with the truth. So sometimes, you can be a little bit balahura, a little bit provocative and all. But if that's your way for getting people to discuss issue in a detailed, grounded, evidence-based, and patient way, then so be it, right? And because unfortunately in our era of social media information age, it's hard to get people to sit down and properly listen to detailed discussions, especially on things na parang masyadong abstract or masyadong policy elite level. So yes, admittedly sometimes we become a little bit provocative here and there. But if you look at it, in my follow-up discussions, I really provide details, I provide links, review of related literature, so on and so forth. Alright, that's what we gotta do. Alright, so dun sa mga late dito, please go back again to yung earlier portions of our discussions today. Maybe just ignore the first 5 minutes na nagbabardagulan and nag-rant lang ako. Siyempre, ayaw naman natin lecture mode kagad, lecture kagad. Even, in fact, even in classes, diba? Teachers tend to start with a little bit marites and then they go into serious discussion. So maybe you can ignore the marites part, go straight away to the discussions we had. And I also thank people, including sila Teddy, not Teddy Locsin, but the other ones and all, for at least bothering to responding and all and respectfully airing out their concerns, etc. And ako, I try to be as respectful as possible responding like that and look forward to it. So bukas, guys, we're gonna have a podcast, and also on Friday, God willing, and also another one on Saturday, God willing. So over the next 3 days or so, we're gonna have a number of podcasts. 2 of them will deal directly with Spain. One is with a good friend based in Spain. I think Manoloto, you already kind of heard him and saw him last week. Also, we're gonna talk to a Spanish scholar based in the Philippines, si Jorge, si George, who has also very interesting things to say about Rizal, Philippines, and Spain. And then we're also going to talk to Leloy Claudio, our good friend, for the latest episode of Nexus. And then God willing, next week we're going to have other interviews, other discussions, including with some of the policymakers, people in the military, people in the relevant policy making, including some very high-level people. We're hoping to get them. So please continue to support us. As I said, I have to open hopefully a Patreon account or something like that because we want to have enough funds so that we can also do like in-studio interviews and all. Yun po yung talagang hinahanap natin. Alright? Thank you very much mga kameta. Talk to you soon. God bless.